Hey y'all. So I've been having a couple of questions from some friends recently about sheep and about potentially getting started with sheep. So these are my sheep, and um, I have 3 rams in this mix, uh, 2 ewes who have already given birth this season. You can see the one little lamb there. Unfortunately, one of the lambs failed to thrive, possibly due to a cold snap we had a few weeks back. But sheep are a great starter animal for the homestead, in my opinion. Um, they do have mineral requirements, so you're going to need to provide them with minerals with a salt and mineral blend. Ideally, you do a salt and a mineral blend separately, so that way they can get their salt requirements without overdoing it on any of their minerals. Most of my sheep here are pretty much straight Katahdin. However, you can see like the two who are a little bit closer, they got a little bit more color in them. That's because last 2022, the fall of 2022, I borrowed a ram from my neighbor who had a little bit of painted sheep genetics in it. They're basically 5 hair sheep breeds. There are Katahdin, which is what most of these are pure Katahdin. San Croix, Barbados Black Belly, painted, and Dorper. So the good thing about hair sheep is that you never have to shear them. They're going to shed their wool in the spring. These guys will be shedding their wool here in probably a month or so. Some of mine do not shed their wool very well, and so I have to go and I gotta like pull it off them. It gets matted and felted, and that can cause it to not release like it should. But overall, it works great. Um, if you're further to the north, then you're going to want to look at Dorper, Katahdin, or San Croix. Those are the more cold hardy breeds. Barbados Black Belly and Painted are 2 breeds that are much more, they have thinner wool. You can see my ram here that's closer to us that has a bunch of brown and black in him. He's actually going to be harvested this year because his painted genetics are actually coming through pretty hard. And he had some cold tolerance issues this winter, even though it didn't get crazy cold. We did have a few days that were pretty cold, but his coat seemed to not repel the water as well as some of his siblings from this batch, and he just had troubles maintaining heat on a few occasions when I'm here in Missouri, and we get a lot of rainy cold during the winter, and that can be really rough on some animals. In general, it's not actually a problem for the sheep because they have lanolin, which is like a grease, and so it takes a lot for them to get truly soaked through. I've even had these guys out in the pasture during freezing rain. When I went out to check on them, they did have a fairly thick crust of ice on the top of their wool, but I shoved my fingers underneath that ice. They were perfectly warm underneath. It was almost like it had an extra insulation, so there's like an igloo. Now, certainly your mileage may vary. This is Missouri. We don't go negative for extended periods of time for the most part. We did have about a week where we were between -5 and -10 this last year, or we had at least periods of the day or nights where it was -5 to -10, and it didn't really go above 10, which is abnormally cold for us. If you're far north, yeah, Katahdin and San Croix both have a fairly thick wool coat, and they will weather the cold a lot better. Dorper is the most commercialized hair sheep breed, so they have the largest carcass weight, where you're going to be looking at something along the lines of a 120 to 150 pound carcass weight, and they'll be about a 200 pound ish animal. These Katahdins, they usually clock in between 120 and 130 pounds when you're looking at a 1-year-old harvest weight. You're looking somewhere around 100 pounds. The big ones, like this guy right here, this is my main breeding ram, and he's now almost 5 years old. I think, no, not almost 5 years old. And it's likely that he's somewhere around 150 pounds. So it's likely that when I butcher him, because he's developed a bit of a mean streak this year, so he's probably going to be going to butcher here this spring. He's probably going to yield somewhere around a 100 to 120 pound carcass. One thing for some folks who are interested in disaster preparedness and things like that, one reason I really like Katahdin is you don't need any special equipment to butcher them. Like if you're butchering a steer, you're going to need a bucket or a gambrel or some way to lift a 1,000 pound carcass. Even if you quarter it on the ground, you're still looking at 400 to 500 pound primals, which is going to be really hard to work with. Sorry, not 500, because that math doesn't work out right, but probably still like a 200 to 250 pound primal. These guys, if you can dress out a whitetail, you can dress out a hair sheep. My experience for the few I've done so far has been that they're basically a short-legged whitetail. So they're actually quite easy to butcher. They are fairly lean meat. And another thing, that if you don't like lamb meat, you should try hair sheep meat, because the majority of the time what's sold in the stores, like in a Walmart or an Aldi or something like that, is a wool breed. Wool breeds are what are typically raised commercially because they just have a much larger carcass weight. A wool sheep will often yield a 3 to 4, they're usually around 300 to 400 pounds, so that's going to be somewhere in the ballpark of 300 to 350 pound carcass. So for a commercialized farm, that's often more efficient. These guys are better for extensive farming as opposed to intensive farming. I pretty much only provide them with minerals. I don't grain them. I don't provide them with sweet feed or anything like that. I do at this point have to provide hay in the winter. I mean, you can see this is my pasture. There's a lot of broom sedge in it. It's got a lot of work that I need to work on it. But they require very, very little, pretty much salt and minerals, and they'll be perfectly happy. And yeah, you can see here that I have them kept in an electric netting fence, which has two benefits. One, it'll keep them in, and two, it does an excellent job of keeping things like coyotes, wild dogs, things like that out. I've never lost a animal to predation at this point. Admittedly, I'm not the most far out, but we do hear coyotes. We do see bobcats every now and then. We see coyote sign. Actually, stray dogs is the biggest issue for us, and in some ways stray dogs can be your worst predator, because a coyote or a bobcat will typically kill one and then it'll eat that one. A stray dog will kill as many as it can. But anyway, the one occasion that we had issues was my solar panel that charges the battery that runs my electric fence had gotten knocked over, and I hadn't realized it, and the battery had run out, so the electric fence was no longer running. And on that occasion, there were a couple of stray dogs that had chase the sheep out of their pen, and because of that, they got chased down to the house, thankfully, and we didn't lose any. Kind of got lucky. The strays were a Australian cattle dog and a Labrador, so not generally the most aggressive, but definitely ones that have a herding instinct. But regardless, it's really quite effective, and it is expensive. But when you're looking at fencing, you're going to need either field fence, something along the lines of this electro netting, ideally both. I don't have both, and I would like to, but you know, fencing costs have like quadrupled in the last couple of years, so those fencing plans had to be put on hold. But yeah, I mean, so with the lambs, if you can get a lamb through the first 48 hours, they're pretty much tanks. The one I lost to either cold or just being too hungry, its mama's milk had not come in fully yet. Like her udder was still fairly small, fairly flaccid, and we had a cold snap where we went from 40 to 50 degree nights down to the teens, and I think that was a big part of why we lost that one. But if their mamas are in milk and they're nursing off their mamas, the milk will warm them enough to help them maintain body temperature even in really cold weather. Ideally, you probably want to separate your rams and breed them at a time where they will lamb around the time of last frost or slightly after last frost. The main advantage to that is not as much the cold tolerance, because they can actually take a lot of cold. It's that you'll be starting to see the first flush of spring grass. So the mamas will have extra forage while nursing on them. And yeah, overall, they're quite hardy. They reproduce very quickly. A 9-month-old ewe can be bred and will typically have a single, but after that, you've got about 50% chance at twins after the first year, probably another 25% chance at singles, and 25% at triples. Triples are a little bit hard on the ewes, so you may want to consider separating and raising them on a bottle. If separating one and raising on a bottle if you've got triplets, but a mama can take care of twins easily. Excuse me. Ewes are usually good for about 6 to 7 years of breeding. Rams are good for about 10 years. One ram can cover, the university documentation is one ram can cover between 6 and 7 ewes per day. So I've just had my ram in here with them. I don't do like the hormone treatments and such to get them all to ovulate together. So I'm going to have lambs popping up probably over the next 30 days, maybe the next 60 days. Ewes have, if I recall correctly, about a 26 or 27 day menstrual cycle. And so if you leave a ram in with them for about 60 days, you're pretty much guaranteed to have hit at least 2 menstrual cycles on all of your ewes, and that'll take care of everything. That's why I did the 2 years back now when I borrowed a ram. I just had him in there with them for 60 days, and all my ewes were covered, and all of them had lambs that spring. Yeah. Overall, yeah, they're real great. I got my first 4 ewes in 2019, in the fall of 2019. I had one that died to parasites, but the other 3 did great. And that one that died, it was always kind of runty compared to the other 3. There might have been things I could have done knowing now, but at the time, that was still a fairly good result considering my experience.